In the remote wilderness of Cascade National Park, a vast expanse of untouched forest and rugged mountains, the natural beauty was often overshadowed by whispers of things lurking in the shadows. My name is Mark Evans, and this is the story of events that unfolded in the summer of 2008, events that still haunt my every step. I was a park ranger with 7 years of experience under my belt, a job I had taken for my love of nature and solitude. Little did I know that summer would shatter my perception of reality. It began in mid-July when I was assigned to trail maintenance in one of the park's least visited regions, the Hemlock Basin. This area was dense, ancient, and eerily quiet, a place where sunlight barely pierced the canopy and sound seemed to be swallowed by the forest. It was a 2-day solo assignment, a routine task for rangers like me. My first day went smoothly, cutting back overgrowth and clearing debris. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I set up camp near a small creek, enjoying the rhythmic sound of water against the rocks. After dinner, I settled into my tent with a good book, content with the day's work. Then I heard it, a distant, guttural clicking sound that sent chills down my spine. At first, I dismissed it as the calls of some nocturnal creature, but as the sound grew louder, closer, I realized it wasn't like anything I had heard before. My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight and rifle, stepping cautiously out of the tent. The forest was unnaturally still, the usual symphony of insects and rustling leaves absent. "Hello?" I called into the darkness, my voice shaky. No response, just the clicking sound, now accompanied by faint rustling in the underbrush. My flashlight beam sliced through the shadows, revealing nothing but trees and ferns. Suddenly, a figure darted across the beam of light, too fast for me to register details. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but I stood frozen, rifle at the ready. Then it pounced. The creature knocked me to the ground, its claws tearing through my jacket as I struggled beneath its weight. It was unlike any animal I'd ever seen, its elongated limbs and pale, mottled skin giving it an almost skeletal appearance. Its eyes glowed a faint amber, filled with a malevolent intelligence that sent a wave of terror through me. I swung my rifle, the butt connecting with its side, and managed to scramble away. A shot rang out, and the creature let out an ear-piercing screech before retreating into the forest. Shaking, I radioed the ranger station, trying to explain what had just happened. My supervisor, Sarah Hollis, dismissed it as a bear encounter, suggesting I return to base at first light. But I knew this was no bear. I spent the rest of the night sleepless, rifle in hand, every sound amplified by my frayed nerves. The next morning, I returned to the site where the attack had occurred. Blood stained the ground, both mine and the creature's, but there was no sign of its body. I reported my findings, and a team of rangers joined me to investigate. What we found was beyond comprehension. Tracks too large and misshapen to belong to any known animal, and claw marks on trees that reached heights no bear could achieve. Still, the official report blamed a bear, the easiest explanation to keep public panic at bay. As the weeks passed, more reports of strange occurrences trickled in from rangers and hikers. Missing gear, eerie howls in the night, and fleeting glimpses of pale figures darting through the trees. One ranger, Eric Peterson, described finding a mutilated deer with its limbs grotesquely elongated, as though it had been twisted and reshaped. The incidents were scattered and inconsistent, but a pattern began to emerge. They all occurred near Hemlock Basin. By early August, the Park Service decided to investigate further. Sarah organized a small team, including me, Eric, and a wildlife biologist named Dr. Evelyn Carter. Armed with tracking equipment, cameras, and enough firepower to handle any predator, we ventured into Hemlock Basin with a mix of trepidation and determination. The forest felt alive, watching us as we moved deeper into its heart. Dr. Carter collected soil and plant samples, noting abnormalities in the area's ecosystem. Trees bore strange symbols, carved with precision that suggested intelligence. The air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over us. That's when we found the cave. It was hidden behind a tangle of vines, its entrance marked by the same symbols we'd seen on the trees. Inside, the stench of decay was overwhelming. Bones littered the floor, both animal and human, some arranged in bizarre patterns. At the far end of the cavern, we discovered a pulsating mass of fungal growth, its surface covered in glistening spore-like sacs. As Dr. Carter examined it, she hypothesized that the fungus might be linked to the creatures, perhaps even a source of their mutation. Our exploration was cut short by the unmistakable sound of the clicking noise echoing through the cave. The creatures were back, and they weren't alone. 3 of them emerged from the shadows, their movements fluid and unnervingly coordinated. Eric opened fire, the gunshots deafening in the confined space. One creature went down, writhing and screeching, but the others advanced. We retreated, dragging the injured creature with us as it thrashed violently, its strength far beyond what its emaciated frame suggested. Back at the station, the captured creature was secured in a reinforced cage. Dr. Carter's initial examination revealed more than we'd feared. Its DNA was in constant flux, a horrifying blend of animal, human, and fungal traits. The implications were staggering. These weren't just mutated animals. They were something entirely new, a species adapted to thrive in the shadowy corners of our world. Then the creature escaped. It happened during the night. The cage found twisted open with inhuman strength. Panic spread through the team as we realized the creatures weren't just mindless predators. They were intelligent, and they were hunting us. Over the next few days, the attacks escalated. Equipment was destroyed, and 2 rangers went missing. We found their remains near the cave, their bodies partially transformed, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. Desperate, Sarah ordered an evacuation of the park. The creatures had to be contained, but it was clear they weren't bound by the park's borders. Dr. Carter proposed a radical solution, a chemical compound designed to neutralize the fungus. We synthesized it in a makeshift lab, knowing it was our last hope. The final confrontation occurred near the cave. Armed with flamethrowers, UV lights, and the chemical compound, we launched an all-out assault. The creatures fought with ferocity, their numbers overwhelming, but the compound proved effective. The fungal growth in the cave withered, and the creatures began to weaken, their bodies collapsing into spore-filled husks. When it was over, the cave was sealed with explosives. The park declared off-limits indefinitely. Officially, a landslide had rendered the area unsafe, but we knew the truth. The Hemlock Basin was a battleground, a place where humanity had come face to face with something far beyond its understanding. I left the Park Service soon after, unable to shake the memories of what I'd seen. To this day, I avoid the woods, the sound of clicking echoing in my nightmares. Some nights when the world is quiet, I swear I hear it again, faint but unmistakable. The creatures may be gone, but their presence lingers, a reminder that the wilderness still holds secrets we are not meant to uncover. In October of 2017, deep in the heart of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, I was called upon to lead a search and rescue operation that would change everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. My name is Elias Harper, a park ranger with nearly 12 years of experience. I've encountered countless challenges in this rugged, misty terrain, but nothing could have prepared me for what I would face that fall. The call came in late one afternoon. A young hiker named Ryan Jacobs, barely 21, had gone missing during a solo backpacking trip. He had checked in at a remote ranger station 3 days earlier, but never arrived at his next planned stop. With a storm brewing, every moment counted. I gathered my gear and set out, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on my shoulders. The trail he had taken wound through some of the park's most isolated areas, a labyrinth of ancient trees shrouded in near-constant mist. As I made my way along the path, rain began to fall in cold, insistent drops. By the time I reached the last place Ryan had been seen, the light was fading, and the forest seemed to close in around me. After hours of searching, my headlamp illuminated Ryan's abandoned pack near the edge of a steep ravine. It had been ripped open, its contents scattered as though in a frantic attempt to flee. My gut told me this wasn't the work of a bear or any other predator I was familiar with. The claw marks on the pack were too precise, the damage too deliberate. The air carried a faint metallic stench that made my stomach churn. I radioed the station to report my findings and pressed on, following a trail of disturbed leaves and faint impressions in the muddy ground. They were tracks, but they weren't human. Too wide, with splayed toes and sharp claw marks. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves setting my nerves on edge. The ravine was dark and foreboding, its steep walls glistening with rain. As I descended carefully, the smell grew stronger, an acrid mix of decay and wet fur. My flashlight caught a flicker of movement ahead, a pale figure crouched beneath an overhang. My heart raced as I approached cautiously, calling out, "Ryan? Is that you?" The figure turned, and for a moment, relief surged through me. But as my light fell fully on it, I froze. It wasn't Ryan. The creature, humanoid but horribly wrong, was pale and gaunt, its limbs elongated and its skin stretched taut over prominent ribs. Its head was canine-like but grotesquely distorted, with too many teeth and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. It let out a guttural hiss before lunging toward me with terrifying speed. I fired my rifle, the sound echoing through the ravine. The creature recoiled, a spray of dark blood marking the rock wall behind it. But it didn't fall. Instead, it retreated into the shadows with an unnatural agility, its glowing eyes lingering in the darkness. My hands trembled as I reloaded, every instinct screaming at me to run. After a sleepless night huddled by a fire, I was joined the next morning by a team of rangers armed to the teeth. Together, we scoured the ravine but found no trace of the creature, only more tracks and a few blood-stained rocks. Ryan was still missing, and the growing storm forced us to call off the search temporarily. We returned to base with heavy hearts and even heavier questions. In the following days, strange reports began to filter in from other rangers and hikers. Unusual tracks, mutilated animals, and eerie howls that sent shivers down spines. Ryan's disappearance was no longer an isolated incident. Something was stalking the Smokies, and it was unlike anything we'd ever encountered. Determined to uncover the truth, I paired up with Sarah McCall, a seasoned ranger with a sharp mind and an even sharper aim. We returned to the ravine, this time better prepared. The storm had passed, leaving the forest drenched and eerily silent. As we ventured deeper, the familiar smell returned, stronger than before. The air felt charged, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We followed the tracks to a hidden cave system, its entrance almost entirely concealed by a tangle of roots and vines. Inside, the air was damp and oppressive, the walls slick with moisture. As we ventured further, we found Ryan's body, or what was left of it. His limbs were twisted unnaturally, his face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Around him were bones and scraps of clothing, trophies of other victims. My stomach turned, but there was no time for grief. Deeper in the cave, we encountered the creatures. There were 3 of them, their gaunt forms barely visible in the dim light. They moved as a pack, their glowing eyes fixed on us with predatory intent. Sarah and I opened fire, the cave walls amplifying the sound into a deafening roar. One creature fell, writhing and screeching, but the others attacked with a ferocity that defied belief. Sarah was knocked to the ground, her rifle skittering away. I managed to drive them back with a flare, the intense light causing them to hiss and retreat. Grabbing Sarah, I half-dragged her back toward the cave entrance. Behind us, the creatures howled, their cries echoing through the tunnels. Just as we reached the surface, one lunged, its claws grazing my shoulder. I spun and fired my last round, striking it square in the chest. It collapsed, convulsing before finally going still. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our vehicle. The surviving creatures didn't follow, but their howls haunted us as we drove back to the station. Once there, we reported everything, our words met with skepticism and unease. The official explanation blamed a rogue bear, but Sarah and I knew better. These creatures weren't natural. They were something else entirely. The park was quietly placed under increased surveillance. Sarah and I were reassigned to desk duties, our superiors eager to sweep the incident under the rug. But the Smokies didn't forget. Over the years, whispers of strange sightings and unexplained disappearances persisted. And every so often, I'd hear the faint echo of a howl carried on the wind, a chilling reminder of what lurks in the shadows of the Great Smoky Mountains. To this day, I avoid the deeper trails, the places where sunlight doesn't reach and the air feels heavy with unspoken menace. The forest is beautiful, but it's also ancient and unforgiving. There are things out there we don't understand, things that don't belong in our world. If you ever find yourself in the Smokies and hear that low, guttural clicking, do yourself a favor. Turn back. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. In the autumn of 2019, I, Ron Everett, found myself embroiled in a series of events that defied all logic and left an indelible mark on my soul. Yellowstone National Park, with its sprawling wilderness and geysers that seemed to breathe the Earth's ancient secrets, had been my home and workplace for nearly 15 years. As a seasoned park ranger, I thought I'd seen it all. But that fall, I realized just how little I truly understood about the land I loved. It began on a crisp October morning. The air was sharp, and the golden hues of aspen leaves glistened under the early sunlight. I was patrolling the Valley Trail, one of the park's less traveled routes. It had been a quiet season, the summer crowds long gone, leaving Yellowstone to those of us who called it home year-round. The radio crackled to life, interrupting the serene silence. "Ron, this is Jenna. We've got a situation near Firehole Canyon. A couple of hikers reported strange noises and found something. Can you head over?" "Copy that," I replied, my curiosity piqued. Hikers' imaginations often ran wild, especially in a place as untamed as Yellowstone, but the hesitation in Jenna's voice made me uneasy. I arrived at the site an hour later. Jenna was already there, standing near the edge of the river, her face pale. Nearby, two young hikers sat huddled together, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. "What's going on?" I asked. Jenna motioned toward the water's edge. "See for yourself." I stepped closer and froze. Lying half submerged in the shallows was the body of a large elk. Its limbs were twisted unnaturally, the flesh marred by deep gashes that didn't resemble the work of any predator I knew. But it wasn't just the wounds that set my nerves on edge. The elk's head had been turned completely around, its lifeless eyes staring blankly toward the sky. Around the carcass, the ground was marked by strange tracks, too large for a wolf, too irregular for a bear. "What could do this?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, my stomach churning. "But whatever it is, it's not something we've encountered before." The hikers described hearing guttural growls the night before, followed by a series of heavy thuds and snapping branches. One of them claimed to have seen a shadow moving through the trees, something tall and impossibly fast. "Probably just a bear," I lied, trying to ease their fears. But I wasn't convinced. Over the next few days, more reports trickled in. Visitors and rangers alike spoke of strange noises, unusual tracks, and a sense of being watched. Then, one evening, a local guide went missing. His abandoned horse was found near Hayden Valley, its saddle torn and its rider nowhere to be seen. The park authorities were quick to attribute the incidents to a rogue grizzly, but Jenna and I weren't so sure. The tracks didn't match, and the level of violence seemed almost calculated. Determined to uncover the truth, Jenna and I decided to investigate on our own. We geared up with rifles, radios, and powerful flashlights, venturing into the backcountry under the cover of night. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, but as we moved deeper, the usual cacophony began to fade. It was as if the wilderness itself was holding its breath. We reached the area where the guide had disappeared. The ground was littered with broken branches and patches of disturbed earth. My flashlight caught a glint of something metallic, his compass, lying half buried in the dirt. Nearby, Jenna found more tracks. They were similar to the ones near the elk, but even larger. Whatever we were dealing with was massive. As we pressed on, the air grew colder, and a faint, acrid smell began to permeate the forest. It was a sickly sweet stench, like decaying meat mixed with something chemical. My skin prickled with unease. Then we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the trees. Jenna's grip tightened on her rifle, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, every muscle in my body tensed. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. The beam of my flashlight darted through the trees, catching brief glimpses of movement. And then, it stepped into view. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its elongated limbs ending in clawed hands. Its skin was mottled and pale, stretched tightly over a skeletal frame. But it was the face that haunted me most, a twisted, animalistic visage with glowing yellow eyes that radiated a malevolent intelligence. It let out an ear-splitting screech and charged. Jenna and I opened fire, the deafening roar of our rifles cutting through the night. The creature staggered but didn't fall. It swiped at Jenna, sending her sprawling, then turned its attention to me. I fumbled for the flare gun on my belt and fired. The flare burst into brilliant light, illuminating the creature in vivid detail. It shrieked and recoiled, the light seeming to burn its flesh. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed Jenna and pulled her to her feet. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted through the forest, the creature's howls echoing behind us. It gave chase, its footfalls thunderous against the forest floor. But the light seemed to disorient it, slowing its pursuit. We broke through the tree line and into an open meadow, where a search and rescue team was waiting. Spotlights and gunfire drove the creature back into the shadows. In the days that followed, the park was quietly closed to visitors, with officials citing safety concerns. Jenna and I were debriefed extensively, our accounts met with skepticism and vague assurances that the matter would be handled. But the creature was never found. The tracks and evidence we'd collected vanished, and the official report chalked everything up to a grisly attack. Jenna and I were reassigned, our experiences swept under the rug. To this day, I still patrol Yellowstone, though I avoid the deeper trails in the areas where sunlight doesn't reach. The memories of that night linger, a constant reminder of the unknown dangers that lurk in the wild places of the world. There are things out there that defy explanation, creatures that exist beyond the boundaries of our understanding. If you ever visit Yellowstone, take my advice. Stay on the marked trails, and if you hear a growl that seems too deep, too unnatural, turn back. Some mysteries are best left undiscovered. It was the summer of 2005 when everything changed, a summer that etched itself into my memory with the permanence of a scar. My name is Alex Carter, and I've always been more at home among the towering oaks and the quiet streams of nature than in the chaos of urban life. Growing up in the small town of Cedar Hollow, nestled in the heart of the Cascade Mountains, I learned early on that the wilderness was my refuge. My father, a dedicated park ranger, shared his love of the outdoors with me, teaching me how to track animals, read the stars, and respect the untamed beauty around us. Those were simpler times, full of exploration and wonder. But life, as it often does, found a way to upend even the happiest of childhoods. When I was 10, my father vanished during a routine patrol in the mountains. They searched for weeks, but all they ever found was his abandoned truck at a remote trailhead. My mother, overwhelmed by grief and unanswered questions, buried herself in work, leaving me to find solace in the very woods where my father disappeared. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had carved out a modest life for myself back in Cedar Hollow. I worked as a freelance journalist, mostly writing articles about conservation and outdoor adventures. It wasn't glamorous, but it allowed me the freedom to escape into the mountains whenever I needed to recharge. That summer, a restless itch had been gnawing at me. Deadlines and urban monotony had sapped my energy, and the walls of my tiny apartment felt like they were closing in. I decided it was time for a real escape. I called my editor to tell her I needed a week off and packed my gear for a solo trip to Raven Creek, a secluded spot deep in the mountains that I had always wanted to explore. My best friend Chris, a paramedic with a love for conspiracy theories, wasn't thrilled about my plans. "Raven Creek?" he said, raising an eyebrow as he sipped his coffee. "You know that place is full of weird stories. People see lights in the sky, hear strange sounds. And don't forget, old man Grayson went missing up there last year." I laughed, brushing off his concerns. "Come on, Chris. Most of those stories are just campfire tales to keep kids from wandering too far. I'll be fine. Besides, I need this." He shook his head but didn't press further. "Just promise me you'll be careful, and take the satellite phone. I don't want to be the guy explaining to your mom why you're on the evening news." I promised, packed up my Jeep, and headed out early the next morning. As I drove away from Cedar Hollow, the dense forest closed in around me, the air growing cooler and fresher with every mile. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was late afternoon. The sun cast long shadows through the trees, and the chirping of birds filled the air. I shouldered my pack and set off, eager to put some distance between myself and the modern world. The trail was steep and rugged, winding through ancient pines and past cascading streams. By the time I reached a clearing near Raven Creek, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and a blanket of stars illuminated the sky. I set up my tent, built a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. The quiet was intoxicating, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the gentle murmur of the creek. As I lay in my sleeping bag that night staring at the Milky Way, I felt a rare sense of peace. But peace has a way of shattering when you least expect it. The next morning started uneventfully. I spent the day exploring the area, hiking upstream and sketching in my journal. By mid-afternoon, I stumbled upon a grove of wildflowers surrounding a series of small waterfalls. The beauty of the place was almost otherworldly, and I lingered there, soaking in the tranquility. But as I made my way back to camp, an uneasiness began to creep over me. It was subtle at first, a prickling at the back of my neck like I was being watched. Then I saw it, a footprint in the soft earth near the creek. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't recent, yet it looked strange. The print was huge, much larger than any human's, with toes splayed wide and a shape that seemed almost wrong. I crouched to examine it, my heart thudding in my chest. Nearby, I found another print, fresher this time, its edges still sharp. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. The forest swallowed my words, offering no reply. That night, the forest felt different. The usual nighttime sounds seemed muted, as though the woods were holding their breath. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the underbrush sent my heart racing. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But as I lay in my tent, clutching the hunting knife I always carried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next few days followed a similar pattern. By day, the wilderness was serene, almost healing in its beauty. But by night, the unease returned. On the fifth night, as I sat by the fire, I heard it, a long guttural howl that sent chills racing down my spine. It wasn't a wolf or a bear. It was deeper, almost human. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the tree line, my pulse hammering in my ears. And then I saw it. At the edge of the firelight, something moved. It was tall, unnaturally so, with long arms and a shaggy silhouette. Its eyes reflected the firelight, and its face was a grotesque mockery of humanity. A low growl emanated from its throat, and it took a step closer. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The creature tilted its head, as if curious, then let out another howl. The sound jolted me into action. I turned and bolted, abandoning my campsite and crashing blindly through the underbrush. Branches tore at my face and roots threatened to trip me, but adrenaline kept me moving. Eventually, I stumbled into a clearing and collapsed, gasping for breath. The forest was silent, the creature's pursuit seemingly over, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I pressed on, my legs burning, until I found shelter beneath a fallen tree. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against the roots, clutching my knife and listening to the sounds of the forest. By morning, I was exhausted but alive. I stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin later that day, its walls sagging but intact enough to offer protection. Inside, I found a rusty hunting rifle and a journal that belonged to a scientist named Dr. Simon Hartman. His entries described a similar creature he had encountered decades earlier, a relic of evolution that had survived in isolation. His final entry was chilling. "It knows I've seen it. It's coming for me." That night, the creature found me again. It attacked the cabin, its massive arms tearing through the walls. I fired the rifle, the shots deafening in the enclosed space. The creature roared in pain but didn't stop. Just as it lunged for me, a second shot rang out. Park rangers emerged from the trees, their rifles cutting the beast down. As the creature's lifeless form hit the ground, I collapsed in relief. The rangers helped me back to civilization, but the truth of what happened was buried. Officially, I had survived a bear attack, but the memories and the nightmares remain. To this day, I wonder how many secrets the wilderness holds, and how many creatures like the one I encountered still roam the dark, uncharted corners of the world. It was the summer of 1985 when everything changed, a summer that remains etched in my memory as the turning point of my life. My name is Daniel Reeves, and the forests of northern Colorado have always been my sanctuary. Growing up in the town of Silverwood, a quiet place surrounded by dense evergreens and snow-capped peaks, I found solace in the untamed beauty of nature. My mother was a botanist, and she passed her love for the wilderness on to me, teaching me the names of plants and how to navigate trails with little more than a compass and a map. But not all memories of Silverwood were peaceful. When I was 9, a local girl named Claire Bell went missing during a family picnic near Eagle Falls. Search parties combed the area for weeks, but no trace of her was ever found. The incident cast a shadow over our small town, feeding local legends about the Watcher of the Woods, a mysterious figure said to lurk in the forest. I never believed in those stories, not until that summer. By the time I was 25, I had moved to Denver to work as a graphic designer. The city offered opportunities but left me feeling disconnected from the wild places I'd always loved. When a close friend invited me to a reunion camping trip near Eagle Falls, I jumped at the chance. It felt like the perfect opportunity to reconnect with nature and the friends I hadn't seen in years. We were a group of 5. Me, my childhood best friend Owen, his fiancée Rachel, her brother Scott, and our mutual friend Lisa. We arrived at the campsite on a Friday afternoon, the air crisp with the scent of pine and the distant roar of the waterfall. As we pitched our tents and started a fire, the old stories about Claire Bell and the Watcher came up. Owen, ever the skeptic, laughed them off. "It's just a bear or a mountain lion," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "People see what they want to see." Lisa, on the other hand, wasn't so sure. "There's always some truth to legends," she said, her voice low. "Too many people have reported strange things out here for it to be nothing." I listened but said nothing. Part of me wanted to believe Lisa. Part of me was sure Owen was right. That night, as we sat around the fire, the forest felt alive in a way that made me uneasy. The crackle of the flames seemed too loud, the shadows cast by the trees too long. The next day, we split up to explore the area. Rachel and Scott went fishing, while Owen and Lisa decided to hike to a nearby ridge. I opted to wander alone, hoping to capture some inspiration for my sketches. I followed the river upstream, sketchbook in hand, stopping now and then to draw the gnarled roots of trees or the shimmering surface of the water. About an hour into my walk, I found something strange. A rusted lantern hanging from a low branch, its glass cracked and weathered by time. It looked decades old, and its presence so far from any marked trail was unsettling. I took a photo with my Polaroid and moved on, telling myself it was just an old camper's forgotten gear. But as the afternoon wore on, the forest began to feel off. The usual sounds of birds and insects faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Then I saw it. A figure standing among the trees, half hidden by the shadows. It was tall, with a hunched posture and unnaturally long limbs. I froze, my heart pounding. But when I blinked, it was gone. I hurried back to camp, my nerves on edge. The others were already there, laughing and chatting as they prepared dinner. I didn't mention what I'd seen, chalking it up to my imagination. But that night, as we sat by the fire, the unease returned. The forest seemed too quiet, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. Around midnight, a loud crash jolted us all awake. Something had knocked over our cooking supplies. Owen grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the edge of the clearing, but the beam revealed nothing. "Probably a raccoon," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The following morning, we discovered tracks in the dirt near the campsite. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Large, with clawed toes, but strangely humanoid. Scott joked about Bigfoot, but none of us laughed. Lisa took a photo, her hands trembling, and we decided to cut our trip short. As we packed up, I noticed something odd. My Polaroid camera, which I'd left in my tent, was lying outside, the film cartridge empty. My sketches were scattered around the campsite, as if someone had rifled through them. My unease grew, but I didn't say anything. We were all on edge, and I didn't want to make it worse. The hike back to the parking area was tense. We stuck close together, jumping at every sound. About halfway down the trail, we found another strange marker. A pile of stones stacked neatly in the middle of the path, with a feather sticking out of the top. It felt deliberate, like a warning. As we neared the trailhead, a low, guttural growl stopped us in our tracks. It came from the trees to our right, followed by the crack of branches. Owen, trying to keep us calm, shouted, "Hey, get out of here!" He threw a rock into the brush, and for a moment, everything was still. Then it stepped into view. The creature was unlike anything I'd ever imagined. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, its body covered in matted fur. Its face was a twisted blend of human and animal, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. It let out a low growl, baring sharp, yellowed teeth. "Run!" Lisa screamed, and we bolted down the trail. The creature gave chase, its heavy footfalls pounding the ground behind us. Branches tore at my face, and my lungs burned, but I didn't dare stop. We burst out of the forest onto the gravel parking lot, where a park ranger's truck was parked. The ranger, a middle-aged man named Tom, stepped out, rifle in hand. "What's going on?" he demanded. Before we could answer, the creature emerged from the tree line. Tom's eyes widened, and he fired a warning shot into the air. The creature snarled but retreated, melting back into the shadows. We told Tom everything, but he seemed reluctant to believe us. "You've been out here too long," he said. "Sometimes the woods play tricks on your mind." Still, he escorted us back to town, his rifle at the ready. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put the experience behind me, but the memories lingered. Lisa shared the photo of the tracks online, but it was dismissed as a hoax. The legends of the Watcher of the Woods were just that, legends. But I know what I saw. Sometimes late at night, I think about the lantern I found and the pile of stones. Who or what left them there? And how many others had seen the Watcher before us? The forest holds its secrets close, and some are better left undiscovered.